Welcome back to the Tableau help videos for the project. Let's get started with some of the things that you need to know for your project. In a previous video, we worked to pull in your data sources and link them correctly. But now we're just going to get going on some of the logic and some of the things you need to know about the data in order to be able to successfully perform your project. First, let's talk about airline data in general. As you may or may not know, airlines fly the same flight from each city more than once. So in order to create a unique carrier code and flight number, we're going to have to create a calculated field. The reason for this is American Airlines and Southwest both may have a flight 5100 from Knoxville to Denver, and we want to make sure that we only capture those flights that are related to carriers. In order to do this, we're going to go to Analysis, and we're going to do what's called Create a Calculated Field. But before we do that, likely in your workbook you have flight number that is a number. I've already changed mine in my workbook, but I'll show you how you would go about doing this to change it to string if it's not already string. So if you find the flight number and you change the data type of the flight number, it's likely a number at this point, and you just change it to string. The reason that you have to do this is to create a calculated field. You have to combine things that are the same data type, and we spent a lot of time in this class talking about data type, so hopefully that makes sense to you. But to create this calculated field, we'll go to Analysis, Create Calculated Field. We're going to call this Revised Flight Number, and we're simply going to add the carrier code. So carrier plus flight number. As I've told you in previous videos, you can just start typing, and Tableau is smart enough to give you the fields. Put them up here. It says our calculation is valid, and so we're going to say OK. And we have this revised flight number that is a string that we're going to use for various things in the project. So let's get started. For our first visualization, we would like to create a visualization that shows how many carrier flights during the entire data sample were made. So in other words, we want to know how many flights left each location. We're going to sort this by state and by airline. So let's take a look at how we would go about doing this. So how many flights leave each state? So in order to accomplish this, we first need to use this revised flight number. We're going to take revised flight number and we're going to drag it up to columns. We're going to do that even though this revised flight number is string, it's a dimension, but really we're going to create it as a measure, and we're going to go down to measure and we're going to count. Now the reason that we're just going to count and not count distinct is because I want to know the number of flights in total. And before I told you I could have a scenario where I have more than one flight 5100 for American Airlines, and I want to know how many times that actually flies. So how many times from each state is that going to fly? And so in order to, this currently just gives me a number of flights. So there are 1 million flights in this database, but I want to know what state that they've come from. So I can click on origin state name and drag it over to rows, and then it's going to separate them by state and tell me a count of how many I want to do. Now if I want to change this to a different kind of visualization, so this bar graph is pretty useful, but in this scenario I want it to be a highlight table, so I need to find my show me. As we've discussed before, if yours is missing, you can just push Control 1, it will come back to you, and you can create this highlight table. If you hover over the visualizations, you'll find the names for them down at the bottom as you see them change. And if we want a highlight table, this is where we go. So we can select this highlight table and we can scroll down and see that it highlights them based on the number, and that's what I want it to do. I also want it to show me exactly how many I have in total. So I want to get a total, a grand column total. I've showed you a couple ways to do this, but you can just go back to Analysis, Totals, show column grand totals, and now when you scroll down, it's going to give me the grand total of the number of flights. You're looking at this, you see a couple of things. One, we need to rename the sheet, which you know how to do from previous videos, so I'm not going to waste time doing that here. But this origin state name doesn't say what I would like for it to. The easiest way to fix that, go over to the left-hand column, click rename, and just change this to say origin state or origin state name. I think origin state is perfectly fine. But we'll notice that we don't have anything that tells us what this data is. So this is the number of flights from each state, but we need to be able to know that by looking at just the visualization. So to get the name of this column above the column, you're going to grab this measure names pill, drag it over, and drop it at the top of the column. It's going to say number of flights, but that's not what we want, so we're going to right click and do edit alias, and we're going to say total number. And so now we have a very handy, very useful visualization by state. So let's try something different. Again, you would need to rename your sheet and you would need to rename your header here, but we've done that several times in other videos, so I won't waste time doing that here with you now. So let's try something else. One that shows how many flights were canceled during June of 2015 by airline name. So if I want to show how many canceled flights there were, I first need to know, how do I figure out what canceled flights are? And so if you look in your data dictionary, you'll find this canceled code is either a 1 or a 0 when we are determining if a flight is canceled. So it's yes if it is canceled, it's a 1, and no if it isn't. So I'm going to start by taking that canceled pill and dragging it to filters. I'm going to say, I want you to show me all the values, and it's going to say, okay, I only have values that are 0 or 1. Well, in this case, I only want flights that are canceled, which if you look in your data dictionary is 1 for yes and 0 for no. So I'm going to just say, I just want the values that are 1, and I'm going to say okay. So now it doesn't do anything in my visualization, but I know that all I have are canceled flights because I've filtered this to 1, and now I want to see by airline name and city. So I'll grab airline name and I'll take it to rows, and let's use destination city name, and I want to sort by this. And so now I have Alaskan Airlines sorted by city, but I don't have anything over here. What I really want is this canceled field to show up here. So now it's showing a sum of the canceled flights for each airline by destination city for the entire data set. So I have a sum here, which will work because all of my data is a 1, and so it's adding them all together. You also could change this sum to a count. Wouldn't change the data again because they're all 1s, which is great. And so I can do that one of either way. If I want to first sort by destination city instead of by airline, I simply don't do that, but I drag destination city in front of airline and drop it, and it will then sort by city and then show airline. So there's a variety of ways that you can present this data in this visualization. So just by looking at this, we again have this problem where we don't have a column title. We have problems where we don't know exactly if this is the right date because I said I wanted this only for the month of June 2016. So in order to figure out is this all of the data or not, I'm going to filter by one more thing, and I'm going to filter by flight date. So I'm going to grab flight date, drag it to filters, and it's going to say, okay, how do you want to filter? I'm going to say I want a particular month and a particular year. So I'm going to click on month and year, click next, and it's going to give me options. Do you want June 2015 or July 2015? I only want June 2015. I'll click on that checkbox and hit OK. And now I have exactly what I want, a text table by city, by airline name, showing the number of canceled flights for June. What if I wanted to figure out how many flights have a weather delay by each day of the week for each airline? And I want to show this one as a line graph. So to do this, to figure out how many weather delay flights I have and do it as a continuous line, I do this a little differently. So I'm going to go down and find, and again, I know all this because I've looked in my data dictionary, so make sure that you understand what's happening in your data, because if you don't, you're not going to be able to do these things. So weather delay is the number of minutes that I'm delayed because of weather. And so I'm going to take this weather delay and I'm going to drag it to columns. It's a measure. I'm going to drag it to columns, and I'm going to say I don't want the sum of the weather delay, but I want the average. So go down to measure and select average for average weather delay. And then I want it by carrier and by day of the week. So if I want to measure by carrier and day of the week, I'm going to find carrier. It's a dimension, so I'm going to drag it to rows. And day of the week is also a dimension. I'm going to drag it to rows as well. You'll notice I get these broken lines, which clearly isn't what I want. This is carrier, this is day of the week, and this is this weird line. Obviously, this isn't a very helpful visualization. But let's find show me. If you click on show me, I'm going to tell it I want a continuous line graph. Well, that's better. That seems to be all of my data captured together. But as you look at this, it shows the carrier in color, which is nice. But I have this weird thing going on down here with my axis where it shows day of the week 0, day of the week 8, and I know that those don't exist. So there are ways, if you choose to research it, to change this to Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. But for our purposes, the numbers are fine, but I want to edit the axis to only show 1 through 7. So let me go back a second and show you how I did that. I'm going to click down here on this bottom axis. I'm going to right click and I'm going to click Edit Axis. When I do that, I can change this from automatic to fixed and say I want you to start at 1 and I want you to end at 7. And then it's doing all of this in the background. There's no save on this, so when I'm finished, I'm just going to click X and say that that's what I want, and it changes my axis from 1 to 7. So I'm in pretty good shape there. If I wanted, instead of this carrier ID, if I wanted carrier name, I could find airline name up here and use it instead and just drop it over the carrier name, and it'll change what I have there to something that's slightly more useful. So that's how you would do that. Let's try another one. So let's create a map that shows states with security delay for flights. So I only want to show flights that have been delayed for security reasons, but I want to show it on a map. So we're going to show it by state. So we're going to grab origin state name, which is, I have renamed to origin state just because I did that in an earlier visualization. But I'm going to grab it and I'm going to drag it to columns because that's what I need to do to create this map. And then I'm going to use cancellation code or legend because I need to figure out why these things were canceled. If you use cancellation code, you have to know what the codes mean. So I recommend that you use legend because it's going to tell you what they mean, and drag it up here to rows. So now you'll see I have carrier cost, extreme weather, late arriving, and National Aviation System. So we're going to look for these security delays, so National Aviation System delays. In order to do that, we first want to find our map. So we're going to click on map. And then we get all of these different things. So what do we need to do? We, of course, need to filter our legend. Grab legend and drag it to filter, and you're going to say, which ones do you want? I want National Aviation System security delays, and then it will create my map for me that shows which states had those security delays. If I want to change them based on size for the number, I can, instead of having this detail one here, I can change it to size. It'll change the size of the dots and tell me how many happened in each one. So that's how you do that. It's pretty simple visualization. Lastly, I want to talk about average flight times. So flight times are the number of minutes that it's in the air. So if I wanted to do flight times for each city origin, I would just, it sounds pretty simple, and it is pretty simple. So the airtime is in this measures column where we have airtime. So because it's a measure, we'll drag it up to columns, and we don't want the sum. We want to know the average by city. So we'll select sum of average airtime and say, no, I really want the average. So if you could just average that out for me, that would be awesome. And then I will take origin state, let's do origin city, origin city name, and I'll drag it to rows, and it will create this lovely bar chart for me. If I want a text chart that shows me in numbers, because I'm an accountant and I like to see average times in numbers better, I simply go to show me and I click on this first visualization type. It's called a text table. So you'll notice if I have this origin city name, I still don't have this anything over this that tells me it's my average flight time. So make sure that you add your header here. I also could add the flight number, and I don't need the revised flight number because it's going to give me the carrier. But if I wanted to add the flight number as a different row in here, I would just drag it up here, say add all members, and it would break it down by origin, city name, and flight number, and then show me the average time by flight number. So there's lots of different ways that you can filter, lots of different things that you can change. But if you get things like FL number and columns without headers, make sure that you correct them. Make sure that you go through and rename all of your sheets, and that your workbook looks as professional as possible. Remember, you need to rename them both here and in the sheet numbers below, and make sure that they have appropriate names. I hope that you found this useful. Some of the logic that you'll need to work through as you create your project.